sequential, remember, we have to achieve them in the order, and they build on each other. So I'm not going to see one occur if the previous one hasn't occurred. So we've been looking at lying on their tummy, lifting their head up, rolling over, sitting unassisted, okay? And by about 9 months, sometimes a little bit earlier, if they're strong enough to support their head and they're strong enough to hold their trunk upright, then we're going to start seeing them pulling up on furniture to stand up. Right? And again, this is often driven because there's something they want to see. Right? So if I look at an unsighted child, it may be later than this, or you may have to encourage them another way, make some noise, rattle something, all right, to get them to make the attempt to stand up. So they'll pull themselves up, and then often you'll see them do what we call cruising. And again, cruising is going to depend upon the environment that you have in the room. Because cruising is, I pull myself up and I start to go sideways, but I have to be able to hold on to something because I can't stand up yet, right? So they'll cruise a little bit, and then when they get to a space, they'll drop down and they'll creep, and then they'll pull themselves up and they'll cruise. But if there isn't furniture or things that they're allowed to touch, then cruising gets squashed. You know, we can't see it if the environment doesn't support it. So I haven't seen this bit of film, so we have to watch this because I want to see what the show is. Alright, see, we have a toy, we're going to pull ourselves up, they're going to show us any cruising. Not yet, okay. Watch how the hands are working, right? The fingers are not working independently. And look at how wobbly they are around the hip joint, right? Because that's a pretty big indicator that they're not ready to stand on their own yet. So the pulling up on the furniture, when you watch that wobble, right, because this hip joint is one of the most mobile we've got in our body, if not the most mobile. So to control this takes quite a lot of work, right? I have to turn on lots of different muscle groups to control this thing. Right, all this wibble wobble. So the pulling up and holding onto the furniture starts to strengthen those postural muscles and hip muscles. About 3 to 4 weeks later, we've done enough work to start trying to stand on our own and be able to stand up and balance. Right? So it takes a while before I can do that. And then I have to do lots of standing to get strong enough to start to walk. Because to walk, I have to shift my weight, I have to stand on one leg, right? So it takes a little while, again, to get strong enough. Now, 12 months for walking is average. Some children will walk as early as 9 months. Other children won't walk until they're 15 months, 16 months, right? Later than 16 months, probably your doctor is going to want to run some other tests, because once we're past 16 months, that's really pretty delayed. But a normal range, anywhere from 9 to 15, is going to be okay. They're going to be saying, don't worry, it doesn't matter yet. Right? But your parents kind of hold their breath for that first birthday, because everyone expects kids to just start walking when they're 1 year old. So it gets a bit concerning if they're not. So what are our rate limiters then? Remember, our rate limiter is an individual constraint. When we're looking at infants, it's going to be a constraint that holds back a movement that we're not seeing yet, right? It slows down getting that movement. So strength, balance, coordination are all rate limiters at this age. At the other end of the age scale, a rate limiter is going to be the first system to deteriorate to the point where it prevents you from doing a move you've been doing, right? So rate limiters are either inhibiting, but they're either inhibiting because they're not there yet, or they're going away. And all of this is rapidly changing, right? If I'm looking at crawling, then the rate limiter is going to be strength in my shoulders and my arms to drag myself along, in my head and my neck to hold myself up so I can see where I'm going, right? When we're walking, as we said, we've got to be able to balance. To balance, I have to be strong enough in that leg. And remember, we're still very, very top heavy. And once you stand up, that top heaviness becomes pretty crucial, because their feet are very tiny. So the base of support is very, very small, and you've got this big top heavy thing on there. So it means tipping over, forwards, backwards, sideways is very easy for them when they first start standing up and trying to walk. The environment can impact when we see these behaviors occur. All right, so we mentioned on Tuesday about the fact that bum scooting and creeping often is influenced by whether there are wood floors in the house or carpet. When we see children stand and walk, can be influenced. In the US, there's an idea that we call the first child syndrome. And it's that first-time mothers often carry their baby around a lot. They pick them up a lot. And so we tend to see a little bit of delay sometimes in those children. Not that they don't get there, but you know, if you keep picking them up and taking them places, and you don't make them stand and try to get there for themselves, then they're not working on the muscles that have to get strong enough to start walking. Okay? In some cultures, it's not safe for a child to be walking at that age. So in some cultures, they'll use a pen. So I remember my mum had a pen that we were put in. We weren't allowed just free range in the house. In those days, children were put in pens. Well, in certain cultures, they dig big holes in the ground and they put the children in the hole in the ground because it acts like a pen. It means they can't wander away into a bush and get eaten by a wild dog or a lion, right? So it's just a safety mechanism, but in a pen, I can't walk very fast, so maybe we don't see mature walking at the same age we would expect to see it. Right? So all those kind of environmental things impact. Remember, our triangle drives what we're looking at in these behaviors. Right? It's not just about the individual. We're not maturation theorists. We're going to use constraints theory to understand what we're looking at. And in constraints theory, that environment plays a big role in the movement pattern that I see emerge from that individual. Rate limiters for posture and balance involve coupling. So coupling means that I'm able to take the sensory information that I'm receiving and connect it to the motor response. Right? So if I get sensory information from joint receptors saying there's lots of movement going on here, I'm able to couple that with tightening up the muscles around the hip joint to keep the hips stable. Okay. And let me play you this. Pause it a minute. So we see this coupling. This is a very old piece of film, but it's quite a fun piece, so I stuck with it. You can find more recent versions of this. But we see this idea of this coupling in some research that they call the moving room. And what they do in the moving room is they have a platform and they have 3 sides, and you're in on the platform and then someone moves the walls on you. It's a really fascinating piece of research because depending who you put in the room, you get some very different responses, right? So when we put the baby in the room and the room moves, the baby falls over and sits down because the brain goes, whoa, I'm not dealing with that. So it makes itself stable and it just sits down. If you put an adult in the room, we start to see more swaying when the walls. Remember I said that we're very visually dominant. We don't need to be. We've got heaps and heaps of other information coming into our brain. But humans rely on their vision very strongly. So when you move the wall, the adult doesn't fall over, but the adult does move a lot more. When you put an elderly person in the room, it's quite interesting because they sway, but the way they sway is different to how a younger adult sways. Which joint is moving in relation to the wall is different in an elderly person than it is in a younger person, and that alteration is one of the things that leads to more falls in an older population. Falling's bad. So it's interesting research because it gives us these mechanisms that are going on. And actually when they put babies that aren't walking into the room in high chairs, they put the high chair into the room, you still see babies sway, even at that age. So they'll sit in the chair and they move backwards and forwards in the chair as the room moves.
Are they just moving the wall or the floor and the wall?
Just the wall in this particular one.
How important then is this visual information in maintaining balance? In most adults, even when doing a difficult task, the sway is small and balance is easily maintained. But if visual information is important, then it should be possible to upset a subject's balance in an experimental room by moving the room gently forwards or backwards. Infants learning to stand are less stable than the adult and far more easily put off balance. The infant in this experiment has only been walking for a month. When we move the room backwards, the child falls. And again. In 92 trials of this type, 7 infants, balance was clearly disturbed in the predicted direction in 82% of the trials. It seems then that for the infant learning to maintain balance, visual information is far more potent than mechanical information. But the adult, however, is less sensitive to conflict between visual and mechanical information, and movements of the room do not, as with the infant, knock him over. But let us give him an unfamiliar balancing task, such as standing on a narrow beam. With his eyes closed, he depends solely on mechanical stimuli, quickly becomes unstable, and falls off. Or, with his eyes open, if the room is moved, even slightly, he will lose his balance, just as the infant did.
Right? So, there's actually a lot of work, because that was back in the 70s, so equipment was not so sophisticated. But now, if you read a lot of the more recent papers, they use very, very clever three-dimensional force platforms. And they'll stand you on the force platform. Then they can see where your center of pressure is and where the sway, and they can put EMGs and they can see where the sway is coming from. Okay? Where is it initiated? How are you controlling it? Because an adult doesn't fall over, so what do we do once we're off balance? What do we do to pull ourselves back? Right? So it's really very interesting data to look at. All right, so chapter 6, questions on chapter 6. Alright, so 6, 7, and 8, and 9 are chapters to do with the development of movement skills. So we're going to start looking at locomotion. And this builds on a couple of the items that we looked at in motor milestones, because creeping counts as locomotion, walking, running, and then we've got some more complicated ones. So locomotion is any type of skill where I'm moving from one place to the other place. So typically we're thinking about walking and running, but swimming is locomotion, hopping, galloping, anything where I go from point A to point B counts as locomotion. Right. And it can involve moving on 2 limbs once we're upright. It can involve going on 1 limb if I'm hopping. It can be all 4 limbs if I'm creeping. Okay. So there's lots of different versions of locomotion when we're looking at humans. Early locomotion then, with infants, involves crawling, where they're dragging themselves along on their tummy. Creeping, moving on hands and knees, like we looked at on Tuesday. And there may be other forms, such as the bum scooting that we talked about. when you read the literature here, they talk about self-locomoting and those baby walkers, you know, big round circular rings with wheels on and a little swing seat, and you put the baby in and they can move themselves around with the tray and the wheels. That counts when we start to look at some of the perceptual development. Children who are using baby walkers have more developed depth perception than children who aren't given that opportunity. Right? The early childhood world hates baby walkers. They've got a very bad name for themselves because children got hurt quite often. Right? They fell downstairs in the baby walker. It seems a little odd to me that the baby walker got held to blame for the child falling downstairs and hitting its head in the baby walker. So I would imagine that there should have been an adult keeping an eye on the baby. Right? So baby walkers from a motor development perspective are a very interesting tool because we see this interaction where they learn depth perception and space a lot sooner because they're able to move for themselves. Okay. Always be thinking when you're looking at these skill developments, what would be the rate limiter? What are the constraints that are involved when I'm looking at these movements? All right, so we've got crawling, creeping, bum scooting, but obviously our first major form of locomotion as a human is walking. Right? So upright, bipedal, this is typical human behavior wherever you are on the planet. Okay. Walking as a skill, mechanically, is defined by 50% phasing. So what that means is that if I split the skill in half, one leg or the other is doing half the skill. Right? So in order to walk, this leg has to swing, plant, take my weight, and the other leg swings, plants, takes my weight. So technically that's what we call 50% phasing. All right? And walking has a period of double support. So if you watch someone walk, there's always a point where both feet are on the floor. Right? I can't walk like that's not walking, okay? There's always a point where 2 feet are on the floor when I'm walking. So we have a double support phase, and then a single support phase, which is the thing that makes it really tricky, because now I have to balance. And then a double support phase, and then a single support phase. When we look at the development of walking, then that infant, somewhere around 12 months, when they start walking, clearly does not look like a teenager of 13 walking, right? So we see a development of the walking skill. That very, very first kind of walking is the brain's attempt to maximize stability. It doesn't want to fall over if it can help it. And so we have a trade-off between stability and mobility. I can't be highly, highly stable and highly, highly mobile. Right? Those two things don't go together. So when we first see walking, we see something that is defined by the brain's attempt to keep you stable. Okay? It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get to the toy, as long as you don't fall over on the way. So what we see is our arms are up here, our feet are nice and wide, we see lots of up and down because I'm not moving my feet very far away. A, I don't want to stand on one leg for very long. B, I'm trying to keep my base of support as wide as possible because I've got itty bitty tiny little feet. So, I'm walking, I'm taking independent steps, but it doesn't look like real walking, okay? So, look at that smile, how cute is that? So she's been walking for a little while. Her feet are a little bit narrow, her hands aren't too high, but she's still not, you can see, as soon as she's not thinking, she starts to get unstable, right? And it's still very choppy up and down. It's not very smooth. As we become more proficient then, we start to, bless you, we start to trade stability and mobility. As we get a little bit more confident, a functional constraint, as we get stronger, structural constraints, then we want to get where we're going a little bit quicker. So I start to change the walking pattern in order to get there faster. So what we see is the stride length starts to get longer. Well, how do I make my stride length longer? Right? If I'm doing this, what do I have to do from this to this? Okay. What have I got to do to make my stride length longer? Okay, reach with my foot, which means what? You got to stand on one foot for longer. All right? I've got to be able to push off that back foot harder. Got to have hip flexibility. And we start to see pelvis rotation. Because the next time when you leave the classroom, try taking a very long step and not moving your hips. Right? When we walk, our hips rotate because part of taking a big step is pelvis movement. So there's lots of things that occur in the transition, and they mean I can go quicker over here and get this toy, but it also means I'm less stable, and if something perturbs me, I'm more likely to fall over. If they're going quick enough, then one of our Newton's laws comes into account, because we see equal and opposite reactions. So if they're going fast enough and their pelvis is tilting, we start to see their arms swinging in opposition. And I'm not going to play every piece of video, they're all available at your textbook website, so as you're reviewing, watching the video helps you visualize the picture that they're trying to give you of what the skill looks like as it develops. So it's a very good idea to watch lots of video, right? So by about 4, for most children, we're starting to see something that's pretty advanced from a walking perspective. Not all of them. You're going to see a couple of children at the CDC who aren't 4 yet, but my guess is by the time they are 4, we will not be seeing a relatively advanced pattern yet because they're severely delayed motorically. Then, once you get into middle childhood through to later adulthood, walking is a highly stable skill. Something quite traumatic would have to happen. You'd have to have a pretty big injury of some kind for your walking pattern to be disrupted before older adulthood. Right? Walking is a very stable skill. In older adulthood, the brain starts to revert back to this idea of stability. Stability becomes very important. Some of that is conscious, because we know that if we fall, that is problematical. Right? So when you're in your 70s and your 80s, you will try very, very hard not to fall over. Doesn't matter how much you enjoy falling right now, you will not want to fall when you're 70 years old, because the outcome of falling can be pretty bad. Right? Part of it is the brain controlling the skill to keep you stable. Right? So it's not all conscious. So we start to see more out-toeing. So when you watch older people, they tend to have their feet ever so slightly turned out as they walk. Okay? That stride length starts to shrink again, particularly if they have been quite sedentary and haven't maintained their activity levels and maintained their strength. Pelvic rotation decreases, so it gets a lot straighter and the speed slows down. You'll also see they tend to go a little bit more flat-footed, so we see less heel-toe and push-off. Right? So if you watch an older person walking, it looks a lot more like this. Gets them where they want to go, but the goal is to get there without falling, not to get there as fast as I can. So again, the pattern changes. Remember, we talked about this idea that motor development is a lifespan occurrence. It doesn't stop when you go into adulthood. Right? When I'm looking at the development of a skill, it's always changing. It changes right across the lifespan. Often they'll use objects as a balance aid. So they'll hold on to something in the house, or they'll use a cane or a frame. Right? 3 points of contact mechanically is how you maintain balance. Right? So I'm much more stable as soon as I have a third point of contact than I am with 2. So, lots of things are going on that act as rate limiters for walking. Some of it is strength. Some of it may be arthritis in the hips. Right? Maybe ankle flexibility or hip flexibility. It may be fear. Lots of things can act as a constraint, and many things to do with aging automatically become rate limiters, because as I get weaker, as I get older, then that system prevents me from walking the way I used to walk when I was younger. So the next one we always expect is to see running. Right? So if we're walking, then we expect to see running. Running, when we look at infants, occurs somewhere around 6 to 7 months later. So on average then, if I walk at 12 months, we see running at 18 months. Right? Remember, there's a big range on that that would be considered normal before we would say, okay, we're seeing developmental delay. And technically, running is also defined by 50% phasing, because I swing, I step, I plant, I swing, I step, I plant. But the big difference is that in running, there has to be a flight phase. So I no longer have this double support phase. I have a flight phase and a single support. Right? So if you film running and you can slow it down frame by frame, there is a point in the skill where both feet are off the floor. That immediately brings up all kinds of issues for you controlling running, because if I'm off the floor, then gravity is going to pull me back down to the floor. So I've not only got to deal with my weight, I have to deal with the extra force of gravity, which means when I land, and I'm only landing on one foot, I have to be able to absorb that force and not collapse on the floor. So running takes heaps more strength and coordination than walking does. Okay. And we've spent 6 months getting pretty confident at walking. We probably don't walk like this anymore. We're starting to move forwards a little bit and spend a bit more time on one foot. And then we start running, and all of a sudden our running looks like our first attempt at walking, right? Because as soon as I add speed into something, it becomes unstable. So the brain goes, whoa, okay, hold on, we're just gonna make sure we're stable. So our arms come back up, our feet go wide again, and probably by 18 months we're walking with our feet relatively under our hips. So our feet go back out, and we take little short strides. We don't twist around very much, and it's a very, very basic action. Actually, this film clip, I don't think is technically running, but they don't give us the opportunity to do it frame by frame. But I think that that is fast walking, not running. I don't see any evidence of a flight phase in that skill. Right? It would be interesting to have the camera slightly more side on and be able to slow it down to see. But from that angle, I don't really see a run. With practice then, eventually what I want is mobility. I want to run fast. The point of running is to get from A to B quickly, otherwise I could walk. So this whole stable thing doesn't really benefit me very much. I want to get there quicker, so I have to trade off again stability for mobility. Right? I need to be able to lean forwards. I need to increase my stride length. I've got to have planar movement, so when we move our arms, they want to be going in the direction I'm going. Arm swinging here is not very beneficial because I'm adding force in the wrong plane of action. Right? I'm going that way. I want all the force production to go that way. So if you're a runner, or if you work with a running coach, they spend a lot of time emphasizing where your arms are, if speed is important. Right? If you watch marathon runners, then sometimes you see this kind of action, because now I'm trying to run for a very long time, not run very fast. Narrow base of support. So when you watch from the front, your foot placement is within your hips, right? I don't run with my feet out here, right? I have to run with my feet under my body, okay? But to analyze running, really you need two cameras, okay? Because you can't analyze, you have to analyze from a 90-degree angle, right? So if what I want to see is foot placement, I can't be looking from the side. I have to look from the front or the back. If what I want to see is the flight phase and the stride length, I have to look from the side. I can't look from the front or the back. So when you're filming running, if you're coaching running, two cameras is useful. One in front or behind and one at the side. Okay? You're always looking to be 90 degrees on to the plane of motion that you want to analyze. Being at an angle, you can't see everything. So think how frustrating it is when you're watching a game on telly and the camera doesn't keep up with the play of the game and you can't really see it properly because you can't see things from an angle. So, as they grow, then some of the changes in running occur because they're getting taller, right? My legs get longer, therefore my stride gets longer, right? And so sometimes maturation does impact what we see happen. I see a quantitative change in force production and in stride length. But faster doesn't always mean better when we're looking at technique. So faster isn't always the right way to approach it. What's actually happening rather than the person that gets there the quickest, because they could be getting there the quickest because they're the biggest child in the class. Doesn't mean their running is the best. Just means that developmentally they're bigger and stronger so they can get there quicker. But their running technique might still be weak. Right? Their development might not be where you would like it to be. Again, then, as we get older, we start to see a change. Running is also pretty stable during adulthood if you don't have injuries. But as we get older, again, we start to see this pattern alter a little bit. Right? Now I'm going back to being more stable. So my stride length reduces, the range of motion in my hips and my knees and my ankles deteriorates, so I'm not able to have as much flexibility and rotation in the skill, and speed goes down. Right? But does that mean I'm not running? It doesn't. If I've got a flight phase and I have 50% phasing, I'm running. It just doesn't look like a 30-year-old running. Okay? And the more you stay active, the stronger you remain, the less sedentary you can organize your life to be, the better off you'll be as you get older. Right? So this one is cool. You'll like this.
We are just a few sleeps away from the Good Life Fitness Victoria Marathon, and if you are running the 8K, the half, or the full marathon, you will see all sorts of people from different walks or runs of life out on the course. And Hans Sandberg proves that this event is for runners of all ages. Yes, Hans Sandberg won't be the fastest participant in this year's half marathon, but he also will not be the slowest, which is pretty impressive because he is 89 years young. He is the oldest runner in the event. A former gymnast took up running late in life. Now, Hans hasn't always been the picture of health, a former smoker and drinker. Sandberg's own 12-step program was literally a matter of putting one foot in front of the other.
I gave up smoking a long time ago, and I used to have a few drinks. But all that I gave up. I run 3 times a week. My run is usually 5K, you know, along Dallas Road. It's a lot of fun. Now these are the medals of the 10Ks. Keeps me happy and keeps stress away from you, no tension. You know, you feel free and you enjoy life better.
Go get him. Hans, we'll see you on the course this weekend.
So, if I could walk a 5K when I'm 89, I'll be very, very happy. But that's an example of what you can achieve. Some of that is genetic, right? Because you can see he's quite small and lean. If he was a gymnast, he's not a big guy, so stress on his joints when he's running will be relatively low compared to someone who's taller and bigger, okay? So you've got to take genetics into account when you hear stories like that, but still, the interesting thing for me was the movement pattern, right? Look at how efficient that movement pattern was at 89. That to me is the interesting thing as a developmental specialist. Okay, so chapter 7, 8, and 9 introduce another way of doing assessment and looking at skills. We talked about the light on here. We talked in lab about total body approach to assessment, and we have the examples of our MSU chart and our TGMD assessment as total body assessments, right? The book introduces another version, which is called a component approach to assessment. And the difference is, they look very similar, right? The difference is just that in my MSU and my TGMD, I'm looking at the skill as a whole and I score the whole skill. In a component approach, I'm going to break the skill down into pieces and I'm going to score each piece separately, right? So, they also have a chart, if you like the chart version. I like the picture version because I'm a visual. They have, for running, and this is validated, we don't have a lot of component approach assessments validated for very many skills, so you often are going to have to make this up for yourself if you want to use this approach. But once you've got the hang of it, it's not that difficult to do. I have to decide what my components are. So when they analysed running, they decided that the important things to look at were what was happening with the legs or bottom half and what is happening with the arms. Okay, so those are my two components. I'm going to grade those separately and then we're going to see what the skill looks like. And the way to tackle this is to ask a yes-no question. That's the easiest way to approach it. So if I look at the leg component, the first bit is watch from the side. Is there flight phase between the steps, yes or no? Right? So they think, the people that analysed this skill said that's the most important thing to know. Is there a flight phase, yes or no? If there's no flight phase, then they've classified that as pre-running. You're not really running. Okay? If yes, is that the only thing I need to know about running? Is there a flight phase? Well, maybe we want to know something else about what the legs are doing. Right? So, does the knee flex to at least 90 degrees on the recovery swing? So for running coaches, and we're talking about sprinting, really, right? This knee recovery, this heel recovery on the run is quite an important aspect of running. So what they want is that that heel recovery should be at least 90 degrees. If what I'm doing is this, then I'm not going to run very fast. Again, that's why I say they're really looking at running fast, because if you watch marathoners or 10K runners, that heel lift does not have to be as high because the goal of the run is different. So, yes or no? If it's no, then you score that as step 1 or stage 1, right? They get a 1. Minimal flight and knee bend. If it's a yes, then we're going to move to looking from the front and the back, and we're going to say, does the swing leg remain primarily in the forward-backwards plane? So they're looking for when your foot leaves the floor and swings through, is it doing this? Or is it doing this? Because in their opinion, the people that made this assessment, that's an important thing to look for. Yes or no? Right? So then I can get a different, I can get 2 points, I can get 1 point. Arm action. Are the arms active, or are they just kind of hanging around, or are they doing something deliberate? Yes or no? Right? Do the arms move in opposition to the legs? Do the arms drive forwards and backwards? Bless you. Right? So we end up with 4 grading points on arms. So it gives us a much more detailed picture of the skill if I use a component approach. It takes longer than using an MSU chart or a TGMD. You can't eyeball it into, I do know people who use this so well that they can eyeball it, but I can't eyeball it. Okay? I would need a camera. But if I'm struggling with a skill, or if the performance of the skill is super, super important because I'm working with someone that has to be very successful at that skill, then a component approach to assessment might be a better way to go than a total body approach because it gives me more information. Right? So if I'm a PE teacher, maybe I'm going to stick with my total body approach. If I'm coaching the high school basketball team, or I'm coaching athletes above high school, then component approach might be more useful when I'm teaching them new skills. We're going to look, they've got quite a few of these. They've got some for running, they've got one for hopping. We have them for throwing. The throwing one is super complicated, so when we get to throwing, we'll look at the component approach to that because it does give you some very interesting information. Let me see how far through my pile are we? Oh, we're pretty far. Okay. Hoorah. Jumping, hopping, leaping, other ways of locomoting. Right? Jumping. So a jump is from 2 feet to 2 feet. Right? It can be from 1 foot to 2 feet. We don't tend to teach it that way, but when we see it in a game, we would classify it as a jump. Right? But we don't tend to teach jumping as off of 1 foot and landing on 2 feet. We teach jumping 2 to 2, jumping up onto something, jumping down from something. Hopping. Try to be careful with this when you're on the playground, all right? Because culturally, over here, you guys call this hopping. And that's not hopping, that's jumping. But because bunnies hop, that now gets called a hop, but technically that is incorrect, all right? So a hop means I took off of 1 foot and I land on 1 foot, on the same foot. Right? So I can hop in place, or I can hop moving forwards.
Athleticism.
Okay? I wore my trainers today just for you guys. All right? So hopping 1 foot to the same foot. Leaping is 1 foot to 1 foot, but it's the other foot. So leaping means I take off 1 foot, I land on the other foot. I can leap backwards, I can leap sideways. Okay. So when we're on the playground, please try to use the correct terminology. Okay? Because you need to practice getting that the right way around. All right, and we'll pick up on there. Now, I have exams, they are not exactly finished. So, you need to choose. The only thing that is not graded on half of them is the bonus question on the Newton's Law. So, I can hand them back so that you can at least get a feel for how you've done. And give them back to me and I'll get them finished. It's just been crazy busy. Right? I'm not telling fibs. I wasn't sitting around twiddling my thumbs, I promise. Or I can just hang on to them. What would you prefer?
Back.
Everybody wants to see? Okay.